I'm gonna keep the park that I work at anonymous, because I still currently work there. But in the past 4 months, since this whole COVID-19 craziness, there's been some bizarre and disturbing things happening. For example, the biggest one is we've been finding human remains being hung up randomly in the trees throughout the entirety of the whole park. I know that might sound disturbing, but I promise you, it's only a small segment of all the disturbing things that have been happening. Sometimes, we only find one of these human remains once a week, or even one every few weeks. Other times, we find 3 to 4 a week, and it's never in the same spot. It's always spread throughout random locations, but always left hanging by a rope in a tree. The human remains in question just happen to be skulls. Perfectly preserved skulls, not too weathered, not rotted, just as if they were left there to be taken by nature. And because a form of human remains are involved, police have an ever-going investigation, and forensics, from what I know, have shown so far that every skull retrieved and recovered is from a missing person who has been gone for at least several years. It's very disturbing, I will admit that, and we're not sure who is putting these up or why. So far, we have no leads, and we can't find any traces of any individuals putting these skulls up in trees. But I'll let you know if things continue to happen. I will share with you, however, that I do work in one of the largest parks in the entire country, and that I have a huge staff that I work alongside with. And unfortunately, I'm not the only one finding these skulls. Like I said, there's a lot of ground to cover because this is such a huge park, and there are many others on our team that are finding these, along with other various human remains, like feet, for example, and sometimes hands, all in skeletal form. Working in the Forest Service and participating in search and rescue, it's not necessarily uncommon to find human remains, especially those of missing persons, and even more so of missing persons who have been gone for a while. But this is on a whole new level of disturbing. It's definitely not likely to find missing remains of people found attached to ropes and only parts of their remains. It's almost like something or somebody is setting it up for us to find in some morbid way. I don't know if this is a group of people or one individual, but these skulls are placed up in places that normal people couldn't actually get to. For example, there's an instance of the park where we found 3 skulls in the past 2 months, where there's so much brush. Normally, you have to have pretty thick gear to get back in there, and if it weren't for our heavy equipment, and to know that this area is there, you wouldn't even know to get back there. It's really hard to explain. I'm probably not making much sense, but what I'm trying to say is for just some innocent bystander to sneak back there and place a human skull, there would be no reason. He would have to be heavily equipped with the right gear to get back there, and we would all see him, since we keep a pretty good eye on the park, after all. Anyways, I'll keep in touch with you and write you back if we find anything new or exciting to write about. For now, just know that disturbing things are still going on all throughout the country, and not just in our neighborhoods with COVID, but even currently in our national parks. Stay safe. So, I don't work in the Forest Service anymore, but I used to, for quite some time. And when I did, I had a variety of stories that I could tell you, but I'll keep those to myself for now. What I will tell you about, though, is for a short period of time, when I was working around the lower East Coast, I would encounter bizarre lights going off in the forest in the early morning hours. See, I worked the nights. I don't necessarily want to say the night shift, but I worked early morning hours, and from where I was in my station, I had a perfect view of a specific area of the park. Now, the park I worked at was quite a few miles large. I don't know the exact size, and I'm kind of afraid to give you the name of the park, because I worry that this will get traced back to me, and I don't want anything coming back on me, like lawsuits or any sort of harassment. You know. I might be being paranoid, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. Anyway, the lights that I'm talking about were not normal lights. If you're thinking I'm talking about fluttering flashlights, no. While the lights I saw did flutter and pulsate, it was similar to that of a really bright flash to a camera, but longer lasting and sometimes brighter. And again, the light would sometimes change colors, and it would pulsate, with no real timing or pattern to it. It did not match any light pattern or any person turning their lights on and off. It made virtually no sense. Sometimes you would have multiple lights going off in different locations, but all completely visible from my location. At one point, there were 6 lights going off at once, all doing different things, one pulsating, one seeming to flash, while the others just completely would die out at random intervals. This was very strange, and after this kept happening, night after night after night, it really began to creep me out. So I finally told my boss about it, and I was really shocked by how he treated me. He kind of berated me about it, told me to hush it up and keep quiet, and it was in my career's best interest to ignore it and just resume my duties and do what I was told. I figured something was up, but I didn't care enough to poke and prod even more, to dig. I never did find out what those lights were, but then again, do I really want to? I don't know. Now that my mind and knowledge has been open to all the available park ranger stories and tales out there, although I'm sure some are creepypasta stories, while others probably hold genuine truth, it's interesting to note that there are many, many, many cases of strange things happening all throughout national parks, and what I experienced was just a fraction of what some other rangers go through. That in and of itself is terrifying to think about. I'm glad I got out of that job field when I did. Okay, so first off, I didn't believe in Bigfoot before this whole experience that I went through. But now, I know they're very real. And whether they're humans or creatures or part ape, I don't care. They terrify me, whatever they are. No matter what Bigfoot expert says that how peaceful they are, I don't buy it. I had my experience, and nobody can tell me otherwise. So, I and a few other rangers had the liberty of permanently closing down a trail in the fear of safety of hikers and travelers, because, well, apparently, a very hostile group of Bigfoot were traveling through the area and began throwing rocks and logs at people who were hiking along this section of trail. In the month of this happening, we had received at least 5 different reports of seeing these large, hairy, humanoid beings that looked to be half man, half ape, throwing rocks, screaming, wood-knocking, and making all sorts of racket. We ourselves got to see these things firsthand when we went to go check out the area. Me and my coworker, who were not believers before this, are now, when we got to see what we believed to be the big alpha male, who nearly threw an entire dead log at us. This thing charged us out of the tree line, and we also had rocks thrown at us, and all sorts of noise and screaming. There was also occasional wood knocking, and other noise like pounding and thudding, and all sorts of crazy thrashing around in the forest. And to be honest with you, just thinking back to the event and reliving it in my mind is utterly terrifying, because growing up my entire life, I was always told, like everybody else, monsters don't exist. Oh, Bigfoot? Don't believe in that. They don't exist. Yada yada yada. Well, I'm here to tell you that people will lie to you, and they have been. These things are very real, and we have to be very careful not to piss them off even more. From my gathering of this series of events, they are extremely territorial, and who knows what would have happened had we stayed around longer, or possibly provoked it. Since then, that portion of trail has been indefinitely closed down. I don't know if it's going to be permanent or not, but that is until my boss gets a hold of somebody to deal with that situation. This only happened in the past few months, so it's still pretty fresh. It was right before the whole quarantine happened, so maybe it was early March. It was just as spring was starting to come, so that's when we encountered it. I've worked at this job for a while now, and I've seen my fair share of stuff, but this takes it to a whole new level. And no, to ask anybody who wants to know, I haven't seen any stairs in the woods or any of that crap. I don't believe in that. But what I went through, I definitely can't deny that it's changed my outlook on my entire life, and my job. Will I stay in this job field long term? Probably, because even though this happened to me, I still do love working as a ranger, and I love being a part of search and rescue. But it's just sometimes I'm guessing I'm having to cope to deal with there are things out there in the woods that I might not exactly be mentally equipped to handle. And I'm talking more than just finding dead bodies, or even missing children. What I've learned from this experience is there are things out there that are far worse than any of those things. Things from your nightmare that you wouldn't normally believe exist.